The wind across the plains of Redemption Creek was a thief. It stole warmth from the skin, breath from the lungs, and hope from the heart. It scoured the land down to bone and dust, leaving nothing but the hard truth of survival. For Alara, huddled in the back of the orphanage wagon, it felt as though the wind sought to peel away the last of her dignity, just as the long journey had worn the canvas cover to a series of pathetic gray threads. She was 17, the last one left. One by one, the other girls had been chosen, sturdy, whole girls, picked like livestock for their promise of utility. Now only she remained, a final, flawed piece of inventory nobody wanted. Her left leg, twisted since a fever had seized her in infancy, was a constant, throbbing reminder of her imperfection. It was the reason for the whispers that had followed her all her life, the reason the matron's final words still stung like alkali dust in a raw wound. A burden is all you'll ever be. Pray some fool has more pity than sense. Pity was a bitter meal, and she had been forced to eat it her entire life. Fear was its constant companion. The townspeople of Redemption Creek stared as the wagon master spoke in low tones to the stern-faced women on the boardwalk. Their eyes slid over her, dismissive, uninterested. She was a flawed implement, a cracked pot. Useless. The thought was a cold stone in her stomach. To be sent back was to be sent to a void, a life of mending other people's clothes in a dim, airless room until she grew old and gray. Then, a man detached himself from the shadows of the livery stable. He was taller than the others, his solitude a palpable force around him. Weather-beaten and lean, Silas Blackwood moved with a deliberation that made the townsfolk's fidgeting seem frivolous. He did not join their circle of judgment but approached the wagon directly, his eyes dark and unreadable. A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. Blackwood, the recluse, the man who spoke more to his horses than to people. The matron, a woman whose charity was as thin as her lips, pointed a bony finger toward Alara. She's all that's left. Damaged goods, as you can see, but her hands work well enough for sewing. Aman in adusti bola hat snickered. What's a man like you need with a girl, Blackwood? Let alone a broken 1-inch. Silas ignored them. His gaze settled on Alara, but there was no pity in it. It was an assessment, frank and unnerving, as if he were judging the grain of a piece of wood. She flinched, pulling her threadbare shawl tighter, trying to hide the offending limb. He saw the movement, a flicker of something, not impatience, not contempt, in his expression. He simply turned back to the matron, produced a few worn bills, and pressed them into her hand. The transaction was as stark and silent as the man himself. He unlatched the wagon's gate. The sound was a heavy, final thud. He offered a hand up to her. It was calloused and large, a map of hard labor etched into the skin. His touch was firm, impersonal, yet it did not recoil from her. Simply aided. As her good foot found the ground, her bad leg buckled, and for a humiliating moment, she stumbled against him. He steadied her with an unthinking strength, his grip on her arm sure and brief, before he released her. He loaded her small, pathetic bundle of belongings onto his own wagon, its bed already laden with sacks of flour and salt. He gave no command, merely gestured with his head for her to climb aboard. The ride to his ranch began in a silence broken only by the creak of the wheels and the ceaseless whine of the wind, which now seemed to carry the fading, mocking laughter of the town. Each gust felt like it was trying to erase her, to blow her away like so much worthless chaff. The Blackwood Ranch was an extension of the man himself. Stark, functional, and stripped of all pretense. A cabin of hewn logs stood against the vast, empty sky, smoke curling from its stone chimney like a lonely prayer. A large barn and a series of sturdy corrals were the only other structures, all of it built to endure, not to charm. There was no garden, no painted fence, only the raw, honest materials of a life wrested from an unforgiving earth. In the first weeks, Alara felt as useless as the town had judged her to be. Her leg ached with a deep, weary pain, a constant betrayal in this place of ceaseless physical work. She swept the cabin floor, her movements awkward and uneven, She mended Silas's shirts, her stitches small and neat, a tiny island of competence in an ocean of inadequacy. Silas never spoke of her limp. He never offered a word of comfort or coddling, and for that she was strangely grateful. Pity would have been an insult. Instead, he observed. One morning, a low stool she had never seen before appeared by the hearth, the perfect height for her to sit and peel potatoes without straining her hip. A few days later, a sturdy, smooth-sanded walking stick, carved from a single piece of ironwood, was left propped against the doorframe. It was not a gift presented with ceremony. It was a tool left where it would be useful. These silent modifications were his language, a language of practicality, of acknowledgement without sentiment. They were actions, not words, and they began to anchor her in this quiet, demanding world. Her purpose arrived on a cold autumn evening. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. Inside, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the scratch of Silas's pen against paper. Elara watched him from her chair, seeing the deep furrow in his brow as he hunched over a large, leather-bound ledger. He was a man of the land, of seasons and livestock. The abstract world of numbers and letters was a foreign, frustrating territory. He muttered a curse, dipping his pen too hard and creating a blot of ink that spread like a dark stain. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. At the orphanage, a kind, elderly nun had taught her letters and figures, seeing a spark in her that others had overlooked. Her handwriting was elegant, her mind for arithmetic swift and clear. She took a breath, the words catching in her throat. "I can read," she said, her voice small in the vast silence of the room. "And write. And some figures." Silas looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and skepticism. He stared at her for a long moment, his gaze weighing her words. Then, with a resigned sigh, he pushed the ledger across the table. "Show me." Her hand trembled as she took the pen. The ink-stained pages were a chaotic record of sales, expenses, and inscrutable notes. Carefully, methodically, she began to work. She deciphered his scrawl, organized the columns, tallied the figures, and rewrote the week's entries in a neat, flowing script. Silas sat across from her, watching in absolute silence. The only sound was the scratching of her pen, a small, rhythmic noise against the fury of the wind. When she finished the page, she looked up, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of fear and pride. He leaned forward, examining her work. He did not praise her. He did not smile. He simply nodded once, a short, sharp movement of his head. "Do the rest." It was not a request. It was a transfer of responsibility. From that night on, the ledger was hers. It became her domain, the first piece of this world that truly belonged to her. Her value was no longer measured by the strength of her legs, but by the sharpness of her mind. That winter, a blizzard descended, burying the ranch in a silent, white shroud. For days they were trapped, a world of two contained within the cabin and the path to the barn. They worked together in a seamless, unspoken rhythm, tending to the anxious livestock, their shared breath misting in the frigid air. In the crucible of the storm, a quiet respect was forged. He saw her uncomplaining resolve, and she saw the tireless devotion he had for the creatures in his care. They were two solitary beings, weathering the same storm, bound by the shared, simple necessity of survival. Years unspooled like thread from a spindle. The girl who had arrived in terror was now a woman, her quiet confidence as much a part of the ranch as the scent of hay and pine. Elara moved with a familiar rhythm, her limp a part of her gait, no longer a source of shame but simply a fact, like the color of her eyes. She managed the ranch's finances with an acumen that belied her youth. She corresponded with buyers in distant cities, her letters securing prices Silas could never have negotiated. She tracked supplies, anticipated needs, and understood the intricate balance sheet of the ranch's lifeblood. Silas trusted her completely. Their partnership was unspoken, yet it was the foundation upon which everything was built. He was the body of the ranch, its strength and sinew. She was its mind, its memory, and its foresight. This quiet equilibrium was threatened by a man named Alistair Thorne, a cattle baron whose greed was as vast as the territory he already owned. He wanted the Blackwood Ranch for its access to the river and had made several low, intimidating offers which Silas had curtly refused. Thorne saw Silas as a stubborn hermit and Alara, whom he'd only glimpsed from a distance, as a negligible house servant. One sweltering afternoon, with the air thick and heavy with the promise of a thunderstorm, Thorne decided to force the issue. He rode up to the cabin flanked by 2 hired men whose faces were as hard and unforgiving as the land itself. Silas was miles away, checking a fence line along the northern ridge. Alara saw them coming, the dust from their horses a rising plume of aggression. She stood on the porch, the ledger held protectively in one hand. Thorne dismounted, his expensive boots crunching on the dry earth. He smirked, his eyes sweeping over her with open disdain, lingering for a moment on the way she stood, favoring her good leg. "The old man not here?" he drawled, his voice slick with arrogance. "No matter. I'm here to finalize our business. Tell him I'll give him his last offer one final time." He named a figure that was an insult to the years of labor poured into the land. Alara's voice was calm, betraying none of the fear coiling in her gut. "Mr. Blackwood has already declined that offer, sir, and it is not a valuation that reflects the ranch's current assets or future yields." Thorne laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "And what would you know about it, girl? Did he teach you to count on your fingers?" He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. "Sending a cripple to do a man's business. Pathetic." Something inside Alara, forged in the fires of solitude and quiet determination, refused to break. She did not flinch. She met his gaze squarely. "I know that your valuation fails to account for the new well we dug last spring, which has tripled our summer grazing capacity. I know that the price for longhorn beef in Kansas City is projected to rise 12% by autumn, a fact your offer conveniently ignores. I also know," she added, her voice dropping, gaining an edge of steel, "that 2 of the contracts you secured last year were with ranchers who went bankrupt shortly after. We, on the other hand, have fulfilled every contract for 7 years." She spoke with the undeniable authority of fact. She was not just a girl with a book. She was the architect of their prosperity. Thorne's face flushed a deep, angry red. Her knowledge had disarmed him, stripped him of his blustering power. In a fit of rage, he lunged forward and swiped the ledger from her hand, sending it clattering to the porch floor, its pages spilling open like wounded birds. "Insolent!" A voice, low and cold as a river stone, cut through the tense air. She spoke. Silas stood at the corner of the cabin, a rifle held loosely in the crook of his arm. He must have seen them from the ridge and ridden back hard. He wasn't looking at the scattered papers or the frightened horses. His eyes were locked on Thorne, and in them was a promise of swift, final violence. He took a slow step forward, his presence filling the space, an immovable object of pure, protective intent. He saw Alara, her chin held high in defiance, and he saw Thorne, sputtering and exposed. He understood everything. "You heard her," Silas said again, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get off my land." It was not a request. Thorne stared from the barrel of the rifle to the unyielding faces of the man and the woman who stood as one, defeated not by a bullet, but by a partnership he could not comprehend and an intelligence he had fatally underestimated. He backed away. He mounted his horse, gathered his men, and rode away, his muttered curses swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape. The dust settled, leaving a profound silence in its wake. The oppressive tension of the confrontation slowly drained from the air, leaving Alara trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. Silas watched Thorne's party shrink into the distance before he moved. He propped his rifle carefully by the door and walked past her, his boots heavy on the wooden porch. He knelt, not to gather the scattered pages of the ledger, but to retrieve the book itself, its leather cover scuffed from the fall. He straightened, his eyes finding hers. For the first time, she saw something beyond respect in their dark depths. It was a fierce, quiet pride that made her breath catch. "You handled that," he said. The 4 words held more weight than 1,000 sentences of praise. They were an acknowledgement, a validation of everything she had become. He placed the ledger back on the small table inside the cabin, squarely in front of her chair. It was a reaffirmation of her place, her role. He then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object. He set it gently on top of the closed book. It was a horse, no bigger than her palm, carved from a piece of pale, smooth wood. It was perfect, the lines clean, the muscles coiled with latent power, the form captured with a patient, loving skill. It was not a toy for a child, but a tribute to a partner. A perfect, strong, unblemished horse, a symbol of the strength he saw in her. Alara picked it up. The wood was warm, infused with the heat of his hand. She looked around the simple room, the hearth where they shared silent meals, the desk where she had found her purpose, the man who stood by the window, watching the storm clouds finally break in the distance. This was not a place of charity. It was a place built from broken pieces. A solitary man, a discarded girl, a hard piece of land. Together they had made it whole. Her strength had never been in her leg. It was in her will, her mind, in the quiet spaces where he had allowed her to grow. The whispers of the town were a long-forgotten echo, lost on a wind that no longer felt like a thief. Outside, the rain began to fall, washing the dust from the air, each drop a promise of renewal. The ranch was no longer just his. It was theirs. And in the shared silence, a future took root.